history that's there. But then how do I weave in the early stages of a new economic system that's developing as a result of it? So that's why, because the charge here is these standards are basically the floor, we're building the foundation. Then the state board is developing those suggested frameworks that you're talking about, but the local control of that curriculum, how it's rolled out, is at the district level. So that's why it seems fragmented from this level, but it has to get exactly what Mary said, to where it's all weaving together naturally so kids can make connections. And that's the job of the district and the teacher, specifically in that classroom, to help make that happen. So it sounds like maybe that's not happened for your kids, and I'm really saddened by that, because that sounds like whatever decisions that have been made at the local area, whether it be at the district level or in the classroom level, hasn't created that sound connection like Mary was mentioning earlier.
And part of our problem here is the way publishers present information, and we need to take authority over that, because the publishers shouldn't be driving our education.
I don't think anyone in this room would disagree with that.
Right.
I truly, and so my argument there would be that if we have sound standards and frameworks and local curriculums, that textbook becomes just one source.
Exactly.
And in districts that are going one-to-one, I mean, the textbook days are, it's about using the tools that students have at their fingertips. Yeah, so I would be a little bit remiss if we didn't mention that we have to come back and think, we're just opening up the topics of conversation that our students are going to get. One of the things I'd like to say to you, and then I'll get before, we're primarily 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9, 10, 11, 12. Most high schools in this state require 3 credits in social studies. So that really, so I said incorrect. We have some students who choose to take more social studies, some that choose not to take more social studies. So really it's 6 semester classes. The other component too is like in my school, our government class, we decided to make it a year-long class. In some schools it's a semester class. They said yesterday, the American history is offered depending on the vertical alignment of your district. They may have it in 8th grade, and then just have it in right in 9th grade. So they may go up to Reconstruction and start right there and move forward. But some other schools it may come in for junior year, so whatever.
Well, what if we had,
Really?
yeah, I'm sorry, I thought you said so.
I was just going to wrap up by saying that is why this is a broad brush that we need to look at. And some of the things, a reminder that we are wanting to do because we care so much, and I want to do it too, but that isn't the charge of this. I think we are getting more into specific curricular instructional ideas.
All right, as I look at these standards and we see world history separated from Missouri and U.S., I see textbook publishers. We publish world history texts, all right? So are we being driven by them? The problem, I think, in seeing the lack of integration at the teacher level and even at the district level is because of the format of the presentation and the information at the standards level, where there's an assumption made, okay, world history is separate from the U.S. and Missouri. If I were to, in a very minimal way, revise this, I'd make part A, B, and C, so they would get the cue. No, you integrate all of those parts. World history isn't separate. I would do Missouri A, United States B, and the world history C, not just A and B. And again, I don't feel bound by the convenience to publishers. What I feel is that we need to help our children make the connections about themselves in the community, themselves in their state, and then in the bigger picture. But it's hard to make that connection unless you're contrasting that in an ongoing basis.
So let me ask you, Snow, that the issue of a timeline. For instance, we start studying world history 4000 BC. And your student is required to go to the library and find everything they can, any author that has to do with 4,000 BC. I know some people who've done this. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what an incredible way to do history. And they have a timeline. Now, I do think that the Light of America should always be in contrast with all those human governments, because I think we have culminated in the greatest system of government based on the knowledge of those things. But to me, I think, what is our timeline? Where do we start? How do we create that dialogue in a child's mind of, instead of this drive-by history of plucking this here and plucking this there and saying, oh, here you go, and oh yeah, there was Woodstock, and oh yeah, Lyndon B. Johnson did this, you know. Yes.
And all those are curriculum and instruction. Or so we're here to say that's more of a curricular decision, which is voted on by the school group.
Well, I know, I'm sorry, I'll just add that I think we also have to keep in mind that that's generally the way that social studies curriculum has been designed historically, is this kind of expanding horizons curriculum. So when we think about vertical alignment with our K through 5 folks, I want to keep in mind that generally the curriculum is written in a way where it starts with me in kindergarten, and it kind of moves all the way up to the community and my region, and then my state, and then my country, and then we do that again in middle school, and then sometimes in some states we do that again in high school. So you have these kind of vertical curricula where it's supposed to be this expanding horizon of our world. And sometimes it happens fragmented, and you're absolutely right, we fragment these things in ways that don't have relationships with each other. And I think also sometimes that we can do it well, we can align the disciplines across each other in really important ways.
Mary, I just wanted to, I can't remember exactly where you said you were from, I'm sorry, so you probably.
We're here now.
Yeah, but Clayton School District is one that does, under these standards, and they're a very successful school district, they run a 2-year history sequence that does exactly what you're recommending, where it's just history for a 2-year sequence, and they include the United States in that, where it's not pulled out and separate. And so even with the standards written as it is, some local school districts across the state have made that decision. It was very well supported by their community and their teachers. It's so, I just wanted to kind of throw that out there as
And
things
that-
that are possible, you know.
Exactly why you want local control is to have these laboratories of exemplary situations. But then, this is an opportunity to say, how did they get that good? And what do we admire about that? And how would we represent that in the standards to take the best ideas and try to format these standards so that people who may not be as perceptive in how to design the integration would have a clue as to how to do that. And I'm glad for that. But I'll give you an example for Julie's sake as to what she tripped in my mind. Is that our founders would have read the Republic, Plato's Republic, and said, what is it about that Republic that is something we might want to take, and what is it we would reject? Because Jefferson wrote about it. So why would we study ancient history and try to find an author like Plato? Because it has a very direct impact on how the United States Constitution came to be written in the States.
And so,
Oh, well, thanks. I really do like it. The point is that there is a relationship between ancient history and world history and how we got the most phenomenal constitution in the world. And I would have to say that clearly I wasn't making a comment about anybody in the room when I said I was not taught that I have such a fascination for history that if I could teach it again, I would do what you were talking about. I would make your identity as a Missourian and as an American the centerpiece, and then bring in the connecting pieces from the ancient world, from world history in different periods. How did we get to be where we are? What is our role in the world now? And how do we move forward? But that's not well done, and the publishers don't.
Just a quick question on what Jamie had mentioned. Clayton, their 2-year history program that starts from ancient history and works forward.
Yeah, I believe, I'm gonna be honest, I don't know their exact start date. I believe they start, around 8 to 6,000 BCE, which is typically like your first, settled agricultural. I believe they start around the Neolithic Revolution. I'm not 100% sure. I mean, our curriculum's online. I could look, but my point, I suppose, was just that, there are a lot of schools, like there are a lot of school districts that are very, very successful and are doing the things that you mentioned while offering it in, a U.S. history course and a follow-up world history or vice versa. But there's also districts, even with these separate standards, that have made the local choice to integrate and build sequential high school. This is their high school curriculum.
And I'd like to,
You know, my school district, we run a 2-year sequence, but we run it from 8th grade to 9th grade. So, you know, there's a lot of options, I think, that school districts have, depending on their resources and talents of their staff and, you know, the emphasis of their community and what local history is available. You know, I like that our standards have some flexibility.
What district are you from?
I'm in Rockwood School District. I'm a suburb of St. Louis.
one of the things I want to kind of address is our work group and the makeup of our group. I mean, I grew up from Missouri, so for sale, should be beside. But, which, you know, I have less than about 80 kids in my graduating class. I live in St. Louis now. But our work group isn't real demographic. I mean, it comes from big districts.
Yeah.
It's not diverse. We have to remember, as we write these standards, that Iberia and Dixon and the little bitty districts around the state, we can't make these so encumbering that they may not be able to. I don't think that. I think that we can do that. Let's keep that in mind as we are.
Well, as my aunt who teaches in the Iberia School District has said, they have come up with their own standards and being high right now. That was said. So I think they're handling it just fine.
That happens all the time.
Right. And that your local school boards are welcome to, I mean, they are encouraged to do that. So.
The thing that, because that's the thing.
Okay, no, we can't be cavalier about that, because they're really not. And that's what the MSET 5 is about. It's about driving school districts, all school districts, to the same set of standards and teaching to those standards. And not just that, but if you look at the No Child Left Behind flexibility waiver, there is a nudging of all districts to the model curriculum. It's written in the ESDA waiver. We can't make an assumption. Local control is in danger, and we have to take this work seriously in guiding the best ideas for all Missouri students, and that's why I really encourage you to keep bringing up the best ideas and figuring out how you can structure it in a way that offers the flexibility that standards is supposed to offer, but also encourages for child development how you encourage them to make associations that in disparate courses they won't make.
And I'd love to jump on that, if that's okay.
Go.
Is, when we look at these standards underneath them, we have columns, especially in high school, we have these columns, U.S. history, government, geography, world history, economics. And the way it's laid out sort of implies that these are separate courses. But in reality, in this state, while it's a state requirement that you take American history, U.S. history, that's part of our graduation requirements, almost no districts have a geography class. And my district does. And we have a lot of fun with it right now. Some districts have economics classes, but not all. I would say not the majority. When we write these, and a lot of these are also sort of in dual columns, right? So that there's a geography standard, but we're also doing American history. So we might consider that while they're sort of separated in these columns, we might find a way to say, okay, well, it says geography, but we can do economics. We have an economics strand over here. So when we do American history, what economics needs to be in American history. We
Don't
consider
forget,
that.
in the law, geography is required.
And
Be
so,
embedded within, if you
Yeah.
read that carefully.
and so, we can make specific and relevant connections like what you want to as we craft these standards. And I think, particularly to one of your examples, a very realistic and powerful one would be compare and contrast revolutions of the 17th century, like the American Revolution. And we can do that in our standards because that would be a thing that we would hope that a student would be able to notice that the American Revolution spread to Europe. So as we get into these expectations, let's bring up those great ideas and write those in.
Yeah, I have chills.
Add those.
I have chills. This is exactly what I should hope for.
So, as we look at the numbers, almost every state curriculum that I know of has similar, not as many, sort of overarching strands as us. Some of them, like in Massachusetts and New York, have history and geography as one big idea, and so they teach history and geography together. We have them as separate strands. Most standards I know don't separate U.S. and world history into different strands. But
Okay, Strand, are you referring to the single page?
I'm talking about the
Gray line.
Okay, it's up and down. Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, Mary's would like to see the A, B's, and C's, which are the concepts, to include an expansion to build, right? Which you said is normal social studies, right?
What I'm saying is to format the standards in a way that encourages teachers to think,
Right.
I need to integrate these, rather than thinking, okay, Missouri and US is integrated, world history is taught separately. There is a way to do a visual presentation of the information so that it encourages the kind of connectivity to teachers,
Right.
so that they make the connections for their students. And I'm saying the current format is weakened.
Right, but in developing a standard to help guide that process, because we don't get to pick the curriculum, but to guide that process, would it be possible to include where the concepts would be to build, so that implies that that's what we're going for? So that would open up them an opportunity to say, in this time frame in the world, you have your government, your local, your country, and the world, and how that all compares and works together. And is that possible to do through the concepts, so that it opens that up?
I don't know what other people think, but we have these wonderful overarching strands, and then we sort of confuse it by having columns and separating things out. So, my personal thinking is why have a 3AB, just 3 copy and change. And then as we look at our document, we have these columns in high school, okay? And so let's put world history and U.S. history side by side, okay? Most people are going to teach it sort of, in time periods. World history is a lot of world history before American history, so we're going to teach that. We're not going to have them mushed together in different time periods, so put them side by side. We need government probably as a column. I'm not sure we need an economics column, because everything that's in the economics column is already shoved into the history columns. Those are some structural things that have stood out to me that just don't make sense. Why have an economic principle or overarching standard and then throw an economics column?
Would you mind, and I know I'm a visual kind, can you just outline that?
And I want to remind you, we're talking about 6, 7, 8 right now, so we're talking 3 years. A lot of this is dependent on the transition between what our K-5 colleagues do and what happens in 5, and then we have purview over 9. So there's also, thinking about that, there are 3 spaces really what we're talking about, and that we should think about this, as scaffolding, as building as well, not so much independent from 5 or 9. So
That's true, and I think about middle school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, sixth graders are developmentally different than ninth graders.
Very good, right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So,
Well, let's see, do any of you all have, our school district does this thing where it's called a block schedule. Do any of you all operate in the school system? Where you have A days and B days and.
Yeah.
What is your opinion? Sorry, I should have shut the camera off on that for you, but what is your opinion?
In general, it does, you can teach in any setting. I've taught them all, and good teachers can teach well in any setting.
Maybe
It's
not.
different.
Certain students respond, possibly certain students and their personal makeups may respond to a more structured or a looser schedule, but from the teacher perspective, I was still put my teacher hat back on. I had a job to do, and I had to try to do that to the best of my ability with whatever schedule I worked under.
Well, and I guess I'm asking in relationship to the kids, because, for instance, my boys, we have English every other day, but we have 10 classes. 10 classes, right? She's doing his homework every day, right? They have current events. Anyway, that's what I remarked, but I was just kind of curious, because I don't have an opinion about it, but, I mean, I think they need their pre-algebra class every single day, I think they need English every day, but there's just some areas like that I'd be curious to see how you all.
Some classes I think do kind of lend themselves in one direction or the other, like some of the studies,
Maybe all
the labs really like the extended time. I mean, some courses, like math and the world languages, but I still, I think as a teacher, you have to read that and build in the support that your kids need. So if you're teaching a course that the kids need some kind of repetition or contact, but you're in a block schedule, I think there's a lot of really great things teachers do that give kids that contact that they need without overwhelming them in a 10-period day, which, gosh, I hope they.
It's 5 a day.
I hope they find them as at least like a contact time or study time.
No.
It's a lot of classes. Like that maybe, I mean, that's worthy of conversation with a school board, but.
So there's five a day with language arts, right?
They
Language
start
arts,
this in 6th grade.
but language arts is, there's Stacy every day, and math.
No, they don't have it.
Oh,
But she's sending them homework for them to do every day. You're supposed to read, and I think, I love the teacher, and I think she rightly needed every day, but it's like, well, we have current events, and we have social studies, and then we have Spanish and English, they have geometry, pre-algebra, and I'm forgetting the others, and there's PE as part of it. One of them has this can do, one of them has what's, there's like a whole lot of.
I'll say the advantage of just what you say is, wow, they get awesome electives. Middle school, right?
Yeah, I mean, I do like some of those electives, but when you talk about having to do world history and American history together, when you're looking at a school district that does that block scheduling, I mean, to me, I think they have a geometry class, a geography class, because they are really just trying to get them to have
Right, yeah.
that math every day, even though they're all the same day, one of them, but.
Yeah.
Ron, would you like to explain, or is there any explanation for the thoughts?
I'm just trying, this is just an idea, figure out, how do we make sure that we integrate all the concepts under the classes that are being taught, and so, consideration could be, we keep our strands, we keep these, other than maybe, this is a vote thing, do we need 3A, 3B? Because all that does is separate out the whole thing and make the topic longer. So we have our first. Yeah. So it's continuity and change. This is our study of history. So our first strand is principles of founding documents. So when in a geography sense, in what sense do we address that strand? For sure, it addresses it in world history, in American history, and in government, and so those things would fall under that. And then we move on to the second strand, which is principles of republic in the United States. So where do we address that? And we already have that sort of. I mean, that's not significantly different than what we have, but I don't see why we have a 3A and a 3B because that just separates the whole thing, and we don't have anything in the books.
Validates Mary's point of giving the flexibility and broader brush so they can incorporate that in it.
And I think economics,
Closer on that form.
and I think economics is really important, and I would like to make sure that we teach economics, right, in each of these classes,
Within that,
You know,
and not make.
So my question is, why pull geography? Why? Because we have it. No, I know, but it's not the story.
So, well, so it would look like maybe,
Why do I do
macro
geography?
would be econ.
Why do I do geography here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't think it needs to be, because I think it falls the same way. We have to ensure that it's embedded within, just like the economics, but it's a strand, as you had on the other column too, just like economics. So that muddies the waters too.
Yeah.
And I'd like to make a point that what we have on our current events is not just driven by economics, but also worldview, religion, and that's not mentioned.
That, I think that if we turn back to the strands, and you're looking at, first of all, that piece of continuity and change over time, there's a ton of that, but where it says individual to group, and that's also, I think that's traditions are in there too.
Yeah, I would be.
That's really like a cultural piece. Our district calls it culture, and culture in a bigger term than not just American, Canadian cultures, not like that. When you're looking at cultures, how do people meet their needs? How are groups excluded, included? It's a broader term of culture, looking at continuity and change over time related to traditions and belief systems and things like that, multiple perspectives that kind of falls underneath there, and that social studies, that social science inquiry. So I would agree that those pieces have to be in here. Currently, that's where you find those. So as we get to that piece, and maybe a discussion, does that need to be titled differently? Does that need to be combined? Does that need to be, emphasized a little bit more than what it is? I think we would all be in agreement of that. But they do need to be there.
Yes, they do, because it is what's driving our current events, and the students are gonna understand it, they have to understand. There's,
I do believe it's appropriate in those courses, speaking specifically middle school at this point. There may not be a class titled current events, but you cannot go throughout your day watching whatever's taking place without addressing it and having that as part of your discussion.
Well, and this happens to my kids in first grade, and this may be a curricular issue, not, but, and I don't know where the recommendation came from, the school was obviously following ideas from somewhere, I don't know. But when you're teaching culture, how do you separate the dichotomy of teaching cultural history without instructing them in religious?
in worldview, and that's
Worldview.
when our religion informs our worldview.
And, well, they were discussing Chinese, monks, and, you have the lion, and you have like these different things, but, and it was very religiously motivated, though, in that culture. And my children were taught their, animal, sorry, maybe they were first grade at the time. And I love their teachers, and I love their principal, and it's a great school district, I love my school district. And we have one of the best in the state. But, I just thought that it was very problematic, some of the things that were going on, and some of the lesson plans that they were teaching.
If you're teaching it objective about what another worldview is, that's fine. If you're trying to teach them that this is a worldview you should adopt, that's indoctrination.
Well, they were teaching first graders their animal, their lion, and that means this is your whatever, and it's like, I think it crossed the line.
I understand your concern, because now you are having them step in the shoes of a worldview that isn't the one you teach your children. And that's to be addressed, not necessarily their standards.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah, if you were just to use the map, that would have not been something that would have been in the grade one.
I just added that person to, like, that little conversation where we're talking about the want to try to pull it across by the courses that we typically, like, these are the ones required. So to graduate from high school in the state of Missouri, you have to take those, and so it's the same chart, I just reversed the end, so it would be like in world history, you roll across in American history and government, which is another idea, but I don't.
I mean, not,
We
I
take
was
it-
gonna say, can we just, I mean, we can cross-reference history with the other disciplines.
Yeah, and I
Those
couldn't,
are courses.
If we wanna do like
So-
World American Missouri.
yeah, I couldn't remember, you would keep going across, and
Yeah.
history, tradition, all of the
So
current history,
within
like
these courses, in
Would
the
that
line,
mean
what
roll up?
standards would go in here, so
Is
that's
that
what
the
that.
requirements of?
So,
Oh, let's-
same things here.
You said some names in the original.
When they get to chart, we know how they're gonna set the code on like a year.
I'm spraying the people here too a little bit.
No,
I like what you're saying, I think, I'm not quite.
well, I don't know if it works either, we were playing with the ideas of how to get it pulled where it's not so segregated,
Yeah.
because right now it's organized like that economic column, the problem is no, so many of our kids, they don't take economics, and so
Right.
the reality is a lot of courses, then the ones we are required to take, the kids aren't getting economics or geography or playing with ideas and just trying to get them out so we remember them.
If I'm reading you right, I'd like that.
But I don't know if logistically this works either, and I don't know how it works with the K-12, like, I just didn't wanna forget that we had talked about trying to get it where it's all together, you know, and I'm like,
I'd like to help you appreciate something about your source documents here, the National Center for Education and Economy. And
right,
do you appreciate what that is? It's a Carnegie-funded, non-governmental organization that, if you read the writing of the president, Mark Tucker, describes the transformation of the American education system from liberal arts to workforce planning. All right, now, my point is, that's the influence you've got in these documents, is a focus on transforming education to enlighten citizens from a group of citizens raised to protect their rights and liberties of the Constitution to someone who has an agenda to transform it to workforce planning. And as long as you appreciate the influence of that organization, and you understand that Carnegie funded in the 1930s a document basically to declare the Republic dead and socialism on the rise, then you'll understand where standards developed by these organizations came
And we know that influences all throughout our schools because we separate history and humanities and English, and they're all separate subjects.
from. So my point is,
yeah, but
my point is, just as you use resources as a point of reference, but take authority over the content, I just feel like I had to say I recognize that resource for what it is. And okay, if you want to use it as a reference, but understand that there's much more to teaching Americans their Constitution, their rights and liberties, and what public education is for, than what that organization is hoping you will do.
Well, and I think that we can't look at those independently, I think we have to look at all of those, and I think we're all in agreement there, that it's not just one source that we would reference, it needs to be multiple sources, and look at how they synthesize together to create the whole that we put on paper.
Which, I'm sorry, what document are you looking at, where you
That's
guys?
it.
On the cover sheet, it identifies the National Center for Education and Economy.
That's, with, I was trying to catch what was going on back and forth with the
Up
chart.
here,
What were you saying about that?
Wendy was asking about the world history, American history separated out, and what Jamie was saying is, is that these are the courses that kids have to take to graduate. This is the requirement for all kids in Missouri. So this title, in essence, these rows are the courses. So what used to be, these used to be part of these would be the strands. Instead, we're kind of saying that these kind of become courses here, and that the strands be shifted and become the columns. Am I speaking correctly, guys? So she didn't finish this, but like it would be government, economics, history, that individual and group, social science inquiry, that those become the columns. And as you look at world history, much like Mary was saying, you're looking at the standards that we've set in all of these areas. So time period, if you're starting, in ancient civilizations, which of these am I covering? When I look at an ancient civilization, I should be looking at these things within the context of that time period.
What do you think about that?
We do that currently. I mean, that is something that my district does.
We organize world history, economic, all the way to complex economic systems.
And that's kind of what I was saying before, that part of the reason that it's separated out into those strands or those columns is to be able to think like that. I agree with Mary that it could be organized on paper better so that teachers know to think about that and not just one component of it, but that they all intertwine to create the bigger picture. That creates that conceptual connection that kids can make, and then they can see the patterns and trends and change over time. So I think we are all in agreement with that.
And just, I see this, and Jim, I see that as a way, if we, I know this may seem simple, but, we can have power strands, or whatever you want to call it, right, that we can, if you've got all red down these three, these are ideas that are across the board. There's green here, and they're in two or three, but there's, if that
And
makes
in essence, it does make sense, because in essence, I know what you're saying, and we do something similar to that, to think about if these are what we would call at a certain point, because our scope and sequence over the course of years builds. And so while you might be introducing earlier on in K through 5, they're looking at those things. As you said, like the Constitution, if they're looking at it every year, at what point are we saying, now they're really getting deep with this, that those power strands, well, at high school, that might be deep in world history, in American history, in government. So as a whole, we're saying, in essence, as they leave high school, this is part of the core of what they need to be college, career, civic life, be ready for civic life. I don't think any of us would argue that.
Okay, so maybe the goal
It's very supportive of it.
is to get that visual figured out. You're in charge.
You have to make a motion.
And I don't know, sticking with our agenda, I still think that we are reviewing our standards.
Well, and I don't disagree that we're kind of going over this a little bit, but I will remind you that I'm very ill prepared for this meeting. And I will bring that back to remembrance. Thank you, Jamie, for the.
Did it come through?
I get it. I have, thank you. That will help me immensely. Anyways, just a moment.
Would we like to take a short break? Anybody needs a break?
Yes.
We'll take 5 minutes and come back, and we'll still continue to review. And then the next part, as we did agenda yesterday, once we come to an agreement that we've reviewed, is to identify additional standards if we want to add those and then look at other sources. So we got 5.
I don't know, is there any good coffee in this building?
Not really, but there is coffee.
Good talking in the building.
Fourth floor?
That's how I teach in middle school. That's how, and I actually, when I worked with our elementary development, it's actually, it's based off the grade level expectations. That's the way they do it. they have to thread in all of that within the context, and it's very hard, I don't know, whether they're doing units on community, so they start to think more bigger picture, if I'm doing me, you know, it's, you know, where am I in my home? Where am I in my school? And, but they still think about geography historically, so.
Yeah, no, right. I guess I just wanted to so when you align it, so you align 6 to 12.
Mine and I'm.
You go 8 to 12. So you still have those 3 anchors? And then
Well, not the break, you can't do what's anchored together are those, the new columns that are those strands.
okay.
That's what's anchored together. Now, in my district, it would still be, world history, and world history, world geography.
So you guys have that nice, yeah, okay.
And like in Parkway, they do world geography, world history, because 6th or 7th grade could be
So
split.
cross, right, yeah, Parkway.
Right. And, but across the state, it can, you know, flip flop 6th, 7th grade, but there's still that nice, that's the core structure, is like
And then
world
you repeat it
geography,
again, and
cultures.
then you'll do it again in 9 to 12.
But the depth in which they take the standards is,
Okay,
so like my middle school, yeah, and so you're building, so like my middle school is starting to develop economic systems, and starting to introduce and start to talk about how does, you know, a traditional county start to shift. By the time from 6th grade to 8th grade, it starts to shift. And then from 8th grade, then we build our economic systems from there. Took a little bit, we just did that. And all of a sudden, for years, they've been using this curriculum, and all of a sudden, it digging deeper, again, taking another closer look, they were like, oh my God, I've just been teaching, I just been teaching working skills. I'm like, oh wow. You know, my famous question is, well, why are you teaching them? What do you really want kids to know? What are we really preparing them for? Let's look at that. Let's look at school. It's really about economic systems that are changing. Yeah.
There's some principles that I'm going to play with when I get into the
That's right.
but then, you know, we can find a way to kind of scaffold them across. I think that really.
And I worked. And I have, they're still the hardest, I'll tell you, the course that has the most difficulty with it.
I hear you, but I'll say is, I think one of the things I'd like to make an argument for with you guys is when I think about this, then I want everybody to be classified. Because we don't prepare like that.
I know. No, I'm saying, I do when I see when they do curriculum units, that's where they have to do it. My elementary methods, they're like, but my kids come back and they're like, oh my God, that was the best thing ever, because it forces them to have to think bigger ideas and incorporate all that in.
Yeah, I guess what I was saying is that as a concept wise, it's very way to kind of integrate this process. So you have to do that kind of lifting the methods course, which
Right.
complete, but I think, you know, and that's the thing that I wanted to also consider is what are the ways in which the certification can be changed at the content level so that it reflects it.
Oh, yeah, that's what it's, no, right, no. Or to be able to teach them economic course. I mean, seriously, that's,
Yeah,
the piece, you're like, whoa.
yeah, and I think that's what I think
Right.
how do you prepare finance, you know?
No, and that's,
That's a good question. Personal economics.
Yeah, I looked at that.
I brought it with me from home.
Okay.
I don't know if it doesn't exist, I'll give you one. We brought
We're
two.
talking about government economic
I was
policy.
wondering where they getting confused.
No.
So, I think there needs to be clarity, and again, you kind of, share the document, then that's what less confusion there is to a real look at. That, we need to have that.
If you're embedding it into other courses, can it really get back to
That's exactly the point, and yet there's
And
language in the
document.
standards that might encourage that.
There might be, this might be a
Yeah, it could be oral at the child level,
you know,
what debt does on a personal level, and how that gets reflected.
As a practical instruction, I think especially with different instruction, that should be an opportunity like that.
what it does now to help you see progression, but not really progression. Like, anyway,
You just wanna make sure it's happening in the right context.
They passed this around today first. A second time.
Yes. Start trying to build up a pen dive. It's not good.
Did you get a new pen or some?
Yeah,
You got it.
I appreciate the natural light.
Okay, I'll go to logistics in there. This has been my beef with the standards have been laid out for a long time. It's just that it separates things into different disciplines, and we want to teach things together in context.
Well, here's your opportunity. Randy, what is your talent? You sing?
Yes. I sing in my years. It's a 2-hour variety show. I also do a lot of.
Dan started really picking you back up.
My specialty is impersonation. Not to say without the. No, you need to share without the hair.
Okay.
We might need to know about midday.
Yeah. Well, the Dolly Parton is gonna take some enhancement. She's happy to be sunny for you if you want.
There's no expectation.
And decorum.
That's right. I'm sure Roberts were.
Yeah.
What this might lend itself to going forward with this good discussion is having a meeting and say, let's go around principles in democracy should be very public and go down at every single grade level and lay that out and say from 6th grade to 12th grade, this is how this change over time. And then we've got that done. Great, let's move on to the next one. Rather than saying, what are we in 6th grade? And then losing that thinking for 7th grade. So, you know, we could potentially have an all-day meeting and address one strand all the way through. Looking at Missouri, Massachusetts,
Right.
Secret,
Right, all of the documents.
taking the best thinking,
Right.
laying out something really.
And I think if we stay true to this, and we do meet with the elementary, that we'll be able to gel no matter what, because we haven't moved away so much from the process, past processes that,
And our work may be able to assist if they're struggling.
right,
You know, we have something that is an annual guiding model.
Julie, does that make sense, the way I wrote it out?
Well, what I think that you have done is with grade level on the left, and you have subject matter on the right. Already on top.
The themes of our courses, yes, on top. So in each spot, it needs to be a lot bigger when they get done. But in 6th grade, how are we gonna address all of these concepts?
Okay, so this,
World history, how are we gonna address all of those concepts in that course? Rather than separating them out and having to make those connections. Which
you're trying to link them.
trying to put them together. When I do all these things every year.
Well, I'm going through rapidly, so I'm at
Okay, that's sort of what I'm thinking is to encourage that.
So listen, we for all that.
Again, as you're going through that teaching in the classroom, there's probably not too many cases where you actually say, okay, now we're going to stop and go to economics. you're making that point as you're going
Right.
through, and look how this applies, and this is, and here's this, yeah.
So in
So-
some other state curriculums, what they would do in a history format is introduce a unit of study and then say, in this time period, what's the history, the political connections, make all those sort of like line up nicely. So in every unit, say in the French Revolution, what are connections with world history, American history, what founding documents influence American history here, what are the economic forces at play, and we use all that to help us analyze it.
And who were the Americans visiting France? You know, that's the gaping hole, is understanding the integration.
This might be a really nice.
So we, approach the idea of really looking at principle 1, is that, or was it sixth grade, which one? Was it, you said grade level?
I think it would make sense for us to take a principle through.
Particular topic through each of these levels. And look at the different, what Massachusetts has to say about economics, or geography, or whatever.
Well, and we did agree on the agenda yesterday, we'd be looking at this.
Well, like, we have a lot.
Yeah.
But do you think that
Should
helps?
we look at these first?
Does that help us, like, maybe if we pick one, read through what we have, and then that would help us know what to look for in the other, because we have probably 4 or 5 different other documents we mentioned. It might help us have a direction for our reading.
And when we decide on our next meeting, I probably can get enough hard copies of all the multiple professional social studies organizations that have their own standards that we could use in this group. I feel confident that I can have probably 4 or 5 sets of the hard copies of like the new geography standards, the new NCSS standards, because I've used them for work in our district and they should be available in our social studies office. So I could bring them in, I'm sure they wouldn't mind, so that everyone, like, it would be, have to pair up, but that we could have them available if you'd like.
And I'll be in NCSS tomorrow, so I
You
can
could
ask
put
students
some up.
about
Perfect.
this.
So that would be
Yeah,
great.
And
for the entire group,
if you
so-
could get some more hard copies of that.
Yeah, that would. It's nice to have it.
I know, it's pretty late, just-
To be able to go through, I know I'm trying to go through stuff, but it's nice to be able to.
And some of them you can't get online because they're just really, creative produced and.
When you say NCSS, I'm sorry,
National Council for Social Studies,
National Council.
Council for the Social Studies.
Oh, I'm gonna leave that alone.
Oh, wow. Missouri has a bridge. Missouri Social Studies.
Do we need to sort of vote on like the organizational structure of our thinking? We do that at all?
So I'd like to make a motion to, vote on this current structure moving forward.
In regards to that, I got that on the chart.
Well, let's leave it general, so that as you brainstorm, you can change that if you want, but I would make a motion that we reformat, the standards
toward that general idea that we will kind of flesh that out.
to provide better integration of information.
Okay, I like that.
Someone, you can say, someone. Okay.
Is there any discussion before we?
Yeah, didn't want.
Well, I agree that there needs to be some flexibility, because we may find as we're working that, oh, that didn't look as neat as we thought it was. So-
Certainly.
We got an understanding, or we're gonna be
Absolutely.
tweaking and.
Yes.
So, I mean,
There is, remember, there's something in Robert's rules that, one of us, either or whatever, to where we're putting this out as a discussion point to be revisited later and as we're going through.
Yeah, no, that's all.
Yeah, it's good with that.
Yeah, and I was thinking even the top headings, I think I think having this is a really good starting point, and, we may get at some point where we think, okay, those need to be revisited or kind of, collapsed or kind of, merged, so. I think it's a good starting point to see, you know, become a little more organic, so I like that.
So I guess the next step would be to decide on who's looking at what documents, or not looking at all documents at the time, how are we gonna do that in a collaborative approach? You can have any thoughts?
I don't know that I understood your question. What do you mean by all documents at one time?
Okay, so let me clarify, you can help me as well. We had mentioned that we were going to look whether it be in Massachusetts or look at the initiative. Is that everybody looking at one document at one time? Is that breaking it up into different groups?
Like an order, like maybe a proposed order of how we're gonna look at, like our order of progression, I guess.
Right.
So we gain that we want to from looking through this.
I mean, I think, yeah, we'll come back to it, for sure.
Still working.
Yeah, 'cause I didn't-
So are you saying, Steve, like, should we come up with a list of the documents that help us inform when we look at principles of democracy, whether it should be both Missouri and maybe the Massachusetts standards?
Well, that's what we had kind of stated, right, that we were gonna look at some other outside.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I would-
so.
I would kind of like my personal preference would be for all of us to be going through the same thing at the same time, rather than breaking up and then doing together.
Just what broader concern.
We were, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, I was thinking of other benchmark states that for social studies that we could look at, and so I was processing out loud, so I apologize if I was too loud.
I was interested to see this.
I was saying that, North Carolina has done some, in the past, really good work with social studies and thinking about it more conceptually, which is what we're talking about here with all those strands, so we may want to look at North Carolina.
So I thought I heard that we would, choose one strand at a time to focus our work. I thought, is that what one strand at a time, like just our process.
Okay, and under that, would you just, put what is in the strand, we're referring to, sorry.
Oh, yeah,
So there are principles,
so it would be like
to
principles and
Okay,
documents,
with-
principles and.
That's considered one whole strand, or just the one?
So I think it would be, just correct me if I'm wrong, I think this would be, like, we could just name this strand 1, strand 2,
Okay, so you,
strand.
And
So then, like, we started kind of looking at those big gray headings. I think what we're kind of suggesting now that we do is we choose just one and really go through it, like, look at all of, like, you know, all the items Van mentioned. So if we were looking at principles and documents, we would kind of look in here and go through everything we already have in principles and documents. We would look at, the Massachusetts
here, right, exactly,
initiative,
yeah.
all looking only at what they have to say about the
Principles of
documents.
democracy.
but we haven't collected all of them.
Right,
Right,
so
right,
that's
right.
what, so I think.
Well, she's just saying the strand, whatever.
Yeah, maybe for our point, I mean, so we would
Really still developing our plan.
Yeah, I don't know.
Process.
Yeah. It will, like, this will take longer for the first one as we develop what's an efficient way to do this and collect all this stuff from different sources and pick what's best. And if we could sort of work throughout and do it, then the other 6 or whatever might go a lot faster.
Okay.
We sort of know what we're doing.
Some of those strands on the end may not be in as many different areas.
Alex, you got the card? So this is your chair.
Oh, thank you. Excellent. Sometimes he's correct.
There's more, and I, if we need to, I can.
This is the really hard work.
Yeah, this is where it gets the.
So this is kind of, I guess, the process that we would be using. And then I guess the final process would be to, revise current MO standard, right? And we're saying we're gonna do that like one strand at a time, I guess. With the understanding that as we move forward, we may get to a later strand that forces us to go back. I process, I guess. And so, we probably can still do this today. We have some of these materials available, but not all, and so maybe we'll have to, I think that was already in our agenda, to really brainstorm these before these.
I think maybe we would be able to, hopefully by the end of the day, at least have a list of what are the 3 to 5. I don't think if you go outside of that, it'll be too much material to go through potentially.
It should change a little bit with streams, you know, like if we're in the economic, there'll be, you know, more, like there's several economic documents out there, but geography has its own, so.
And I also want to remind us that, you know, we have to play this really delicate dance between, you know, knowledge, skills, and dispositions. And that the standards can't kind of, you know, lean heavily one way or another, but they should be kind of this nice articulation between making declarations like kids should know the Declaration of Independence, obviously, but also not being over-descriptive with, you know, specifics after that. And also thinking about what kinds of skills we want our kids to do, because I'm afraid a lot of standards become really knowledge heavy, but they don't actually get our kids to do some of the critical thinking and analysis skills that we talked about, like we talked about assessments yesterday.
Right.
So,
Speaking of that, Missouri is required to do 75 standards in the bill. So what does that actually give us? How many standards do we actually have?
Well, that's why the placement was important, is to give a reference point to what currently exists. And what you see here in social studies is, you know, the number. That is the same, it correlates with the places. So you have 6. And the question would become, what groups might want to have a change in the number of standards and why? So, in doing these comparisons with other documents, you might find that you want 1 or 2 more, which is why eventually we need to come to a large group and say, did you do that, or did you subtract some? Right now, there's a margin of 2 between what is currently on the placemat and what it is well.
And when you say placemat, would you remind me of that?
They say you have the placemat.
Show me standards. There
and
was,
we saw a PowerPoint yesterday.
take that copy here.
Yeah.
So you,
online for it.
She did, she had some. Information this.
So, which is why at some point, we need to have this discussion, you know, in a coordinated fashion.
Yes. You want these?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah,
Everything.
I'll take one. There's extras.
I can get it online, someone with a hard copy.
Yeah, I can.
I'll put it in the one.
No dolly, no placement.
This is mine.
So, yeah, it's knowledge, performance, and academic success. And I hear what you're saying about dispositions, but the question is, shouldn't that be in every subject all the time? Do you actually have to put that in, or do you write it as a theme in the intro and say it should be integrated? And then have exemplars of how you do the integration without trying to compromise content, and so it becomes formatting.
And I'm not saying, I didn't want to get into the nitty-gritty of that discussion here, because I think that will come later. I just want to, as we're looking through these documents and trying to flesh out principles of, you know, documents and shaping governments, that we also think about not just the documents themselves, which is really important,
Yes.
but also how kids can interact with these documents.
Yeah.
Because I think that's equally as important,
And to
especially in social
Jessica's
studies.
point, at a developmentally appropriate level.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly.
That is a good piece for that analyzation and the identifying of all changes.
Right.
Any, curriculum evaluation?
So we go over this as a group, look
you wanna start there and then think
I
about
do
documents we
believe,
use, or?
starting with,
Do you wanna go in order, or do you, like, just number one first?
number one, grade 6.
Okay, I'm sorry, we are back here on this one, correct? If we're starting grade 7, right, so we're in this, and so we're starting here. Okay.
Well, maybe
Oh,
you'll.
the first one, is it?
Okay,
Someone will
Yeah.
be quick to read.
Look at
Principles of the Republic.
standard one.
I don't know what Wendy is able to do, or what you guys think, but, rather than having to review everything later, it might be nice to have a tool to record some of our thoughts, for 6th grade, first grade 1, so that we're sort of putting in there what our thoughts are, and then go down, and that's not big enough, obviously, so
We're gonna have to have a page for each.
where do we want to, how do we want to record our best ideas as we go? Do we want to do it
I think that we should.
digitally, or?
Are they speaking pages, maybe?
No, it seemed old school, not sticky.
It is 10 already. Oh my goodness.
Thinking of the clock, I don't know if we want to get into this at the moment, but just to mention, we do just have here a couple more hours altogether. Do we have some way of, other than email, and maybe that'll do it, kind of keeping in contact and reviewing these between now and the next meeting, so we can keep making progress?
I think that's gonna be a discussion for later. I think that if we open that up now, it potentially could take us in a lot of directions. I think that since we're getting started, probably could.
Let's make the point to write that before the end of the
Absolutely,
meeting.
for sure.
We're reading.
Yeah, we're reading.
Number one, grades 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Can somebody like explain to me on that first page now, and maybe I'm off track here. Whenever we say minority rights, there's a lot of that over this page.
That's not, okay.
I don't know what that means, so can you explain
Oh,
that?
absolutely.
And that's where the.
That's in relation to majority.
Majority,
Right.
that's-
Well,
So when you think about any time when we vote and, or those people that have, that there's numerically superior, any other group that's not, and say, that, Catholics were a minority, you can look at the healthcare bill, and, so we have the healthcare bill, but then a certain group, because they're not 51% of the population, or they don't get to have their say in that. So, there are certain Catholics that are concerned, like, about the healthcare provision, like the contraceptive provision in the healthcare bill, right? So that's an example of minority rights.
Okay.
How do we protect a group that isn't numerically superior
right.
to everyone else? So, in theory, the majority could tread over the rights of the minority, whoever that happens to be, all the time, if we don't have protections for those people. That could be a racial minority, a religious minority, cultural minority.
It just, I wasn't sure what it meant, because it seemed a little bit,
Does that make sense? Did I explain it?
yeah, I think you did very well, thank you. I wasn't sure what it meant, so I think I do understand that.
Do we need an explanation of, as we look at this, of what the
That's a really good thing.
Yes, probably.
A DOK?
Yeah.
Yeah, what is a DOK?
Thanks.
And then I'll try to find a graphic super quick, and I'll email it since I have that, or do you have the date?
The DOK is referring to the depth of knowledge, or the depth of which kids have to go to express their learning related to that particular standard or concept. So that's where we were saying earlier, when we choose the language we use, the verbs, the grammar that we choose, albeit beyond even just like the normal grammar pieces, is huge, because that indicates to the teacher and to those districts the level in which kids have to go with it. So if they're looking at the Constitution in second grade, the depth they should take it in high school should be very different. So that's why, that's what that's referring to. So DOK just means the depth of the learning that they have to do and the depth in which they have to be able to express that learning. One being kind of, you know, very surface depth, and then 2, getting a little deeper, 3, even deeper, and 4. So, and the deeper the learning gets, the more performance-based, more application, that problem solving, that critical thinking that we mentioned, that I said we want to make sure we don't forget about that. Because that's really the life skill that we want them to have related to that particular.
So it's still covering across the spectrum, but to different depths.
And there's a graphic that.
Illustratively, if we had a first grader and asked them to draw the capital, they may sketch an outline of it, perfectly acceptable, covers all the points.
Right.
A senior may be
Right.
penciling in and painting and shading.
Exactly.
Level 1.
Would this pertain to the colors and emphasis that he was going about mentioning earlier? Like if you wanted to go deeper,
We want to hit these primary things, but then you go deeper. But possibly, like when you get to high school, if you're saying that in high school, it may not be deeper, it may be consistent over courses, because when you're talking about high schoolers, they're starting down the same level, whether they're 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, they're starting, like a 9th grader who takes a senior level math class. So, I mean, when you start getting to the high school level, the expectation is that no matter where you finish, you have to get it to the end, because
She's also
you
questioning
could
the
be going out into the real world and you're going to have multiple kids.
I appreciate that. It is overwhelming, like, I get if you would now, it would be, like, I would like, yes, you can.
It's primary, that's just for, yeah.
Right.
So, turning red, turning
that's definitely because they knew that they had to apply.
exactly, further, yeah.
That there's, I really like philosophy, because you know, that we're taking an actual instead of just fake words. Yeah, historic
Yeah.
term, like academic.
Right, okay.
Because you see a part of it. and
Okay, that's where we have rule of law.
And they're saying like, you know, federalism, and these are also, these are real terms, not just, you know, there's some relationship and historic.
You have to teach it in historical.
Or they're saying there is a historical definition, a glossary definition.
Or maybe an old word, that it could be good, or these words we don't use.
I think it really means like, if you look at
Common.
common.
We were trying to find one common, right.
But there's also a historical definition.
So this is a grade level, this is their foundation.
Primary document or a source.
So I was just double checking. I gotta remember.
Things that.
I was
Please.
See those documents.
But,
Yeah.
and that, those are all.
So that's what I'm saying, like, there's an alignment between like just the knowledge, but also the skills that you're asking them to actually analyze the whole so much. So that you're just about what they actually also trying to get skills.
Writing their curriculum.
Sixth grade. Yeah, scaffolding.
And the dispositions are viewed, you know, they.
So it's like, they do that, grade level.
So it's overall, you know, it's about, which I know all of
We'll
this.
change what I'm going to do.
Right. Well, then it's not colored, then it's. Right, it's binary.
There's some basically, that's the hard, that's hard, is that
No, we mentioned that, did that, is that one of that's somewhere?
I just put it, they're set up by grade level, so we really have to, yeah, we're happy about your grade level. Or if you don't get to that point, for next time, we can probably get some hard copies to look at. So I can get us to the main page and send that.
Is it basically North Carolina Department of Education and?
Well, you have to know how to get it, it's kind of like our Department of Education. Can't find anything you're looking for. But I'll get the main page, but then you have to go down and find social studies in the grade level, and I'll send it in our email.
That'll work.
Thanks.
We're looking at North Carolina standards, just,
Say it again.
we're looking at North Carolina standards.
Oh,
which,
okay.
You know, just
Sure.
to mention, they were really good.
My laptop, if I told you the story of my laptop in the last 2 years,
don't have it here.
And a lot of what they've done, it's the format that they've used to create that conceptual idea of how to integrate those pieces together. They do really good work. That state is very different than Missouri. They're not a local control state. And I say that loosely because they are and they aren't, but the majority of their state works from their state, their DESE of North Carolina, works on not just the standards, but also frameworks and unit development. So they go down to the curriculum level for a majority of the districts within the state, but there's some that do not. So there's some options there. And so you'll see that their structure is more kind of what we were talking about, and weaving some of those ideas together. So that's why I was like, we definitely want to look at that because they've done a lot of work to get it really neat and tidy to be able to work throughout the state.
Not to be contentious, but North Carolina has more homeschoolers than parent schools. I don't know why. Statistic. So I don't know.
Okay, so if I can get my try and yeah, so I wouldn't say that they're not because they do have a little bit of it.
That
But
website was registered?
I'm still trying it's not playing nice.
Some Wi-Fi.
Yeah, my Wi-Fi isn't playing nice right now. So as soon as I get it, I'll send it to you guys. But it's not going to be an easy click on it. You have to look for it, you have to scroll down in social studies and look at it by grade level.
They're called the South Carolina Essential Standards.
They're the essential standards. Maybe if you can get to it, mine's spinning, maybe you can send the links to. And if we had any questions, I've worked with Fagor in the past, so we could easily email her, and I know that she would respond if there were things that we were like, why did you do this? What were you thinking with this for reading?
And Fagor is who, I'm sorry.
She is their social studies person for the state. She's their, I don't know her exact title, but she,
Like
because,
their resource, social studies resource directors.
Sandra Scott's kind of version there with Massachusetts. She's kind of a driver there. And
yeah, we
Yeah,
definitely
exactly.
look at Massachusetts too. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Oh, I
I think
know.
one Massachusetts person, so let me look.
North Carolina Social
I'm not
Studies.
sure who the social studies person is, but Sandra Stotsky is one of the,
She was the one that
she's one of the architects.
designed that 2003 one and was involved in it.
I can get you the teachers of the year for those states, but.
Let me look at
They're really nice, like, I really like them. They're really good. Karen and Anne Marie.
We were just discussing North Carolina's standards,
Yeah.
and they don't have local school board.
Well, I said, I wouldn't say it wasn't,
It's just
don't
different.
quote me, it's different than ours. They have a full-scale state option, and then there's some districts that don't follow and suit there. So I would have to go look at their legislation to see what exactly the type of curriculum control they have at that point, but it's kind of a blended piece of local and more state
But she
level.
said they have more cohesive history, and we had worked with Faye Gore, is that her name? Who was the social
She's
studies
their social
expert during
studies
the
person.
state?
And it was more the format that I said, the way they've structured it is more
Yeah.
similar to what we've done. I'm not advocating that all their standards are where we need to be. I'm just saying we want to look at it and see how they're doing it and how they're trying to develop more.
It's another
A
point
bigger
of
picture.
discussion.
Right. So
When I
please
think it
don't,
looks like
please don't
it starts with
misunderstand.
general, gets into more specific,
Right.
and
Yeah.
then detail items.
It's all right.
Well, and just the
It's a big flow.
it's horizontally
It's clean, yeah.
instead of.
Right.
Yeah.
Presentation.
Yeah.
Well, what I see here in the descriptor is, of what I see, understand political, economic, of social significance of historical events, that's exactly what we're talking about.
Exactly, that's why I brought it up.
Really great to
We'll do
hear.
a little more
And,
integrated.
and writing all of those words in the, social descriptor, yeah.
That's that. Just kind of cleans it up. And it's not overwhelming, it looked to me like,
No, it's not.
this is, well, and, I'm sorry.
No, that's my fault.
And it's very easy to understand because the way it's 6H1, 6th grade, H, and then this is principal or standard one.
It looks like it's outline format.
It's,
It makes sense.
It's really simple. I mean, George was
I
right,
can
when we
understand
articulated
this.
it that way,
Yeah.
it was super, great.
But I do want to emphasize that that's kind of like phase 2. So know that they originally had a document, so to speak, more like this, and then when revisiting, have said, just like we're doing, going, yeah,
not lessening the product, but
No.
the format and the usability. The reason that you and I had looked at this in so long was because it's cumbersome and it doesn't work well.
right. And part of the work that they've done is oftentimes what happens here in Missouri at the district, at the local level. It's taking that and then restructuring it. So that's why it's kind of a happy medium because they haven't gotten to the course or the unit level yet in that piece you're looking at, like we would in our local control. So it's kind of just a nice happy medium for us to look at.
We have the opportunity to create these standards in a more usable fashion. That helps every district in the state when they come to that curriculum writing.
Right.
It'll be on.
You know what, I'm all for making learning, understandable. And nothing frustrates me more than when my kids come home with homework and the goal of the question is to just make it as frustrating as possible. All it does is frustrate the child and they absorb none of it. They just sit there and cry, oh yeah, we finally get it, but we've spent most of our time being frustrated instead of absorbing it. So I can appreciate anything that simplifies.
Do you think as a parent, it's easier for you to read it organized by grade going across? Like
This
instead
is
of.
6th grade and then if we went back here.
I don't have a lot to compare to. I would say, when I look at that, I see that, again, I'm not a visual person,
Yeah.
so, you know.
But you have some graders.
I
right?
do.
Okay, so.
But if it's explained to me, maybe then I'll go, oh yeah, that's a lot easier than this.
But again,
And a lot of times it's just not explained to parents, we just sit home with the stuff and we're just kind of, okay, figure it out,
But this probably, I don't know.
It makes logical sense the way this is set up.
Like, I've never read these standards for my elementary kids.
But if-
Like.
If they don't make sense to educators, then, like, the less these make sense, the less they actually happen.
I looked at them a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Well, this is kind of vertical learning, the way this is written, and we're used to learning left to right, and so it makes more sense to learn left to right.
And I think you hit it on the head, which is why rural districts are, we're assured representation here. So they have less resources than the larger districts for this. And in some of those classrooms, it's the teacher who's interpreting these standards.
Well, and a lot of our rural teachers are teaching, you have one social studies teacher for every kid, they're teaching all 5 of the classes you offer, so anything that I think makes this more usable.
Exactly.
Because if you're a single, I graduated from a K-12 single building high school, Kansas, but, and so you don't need a big team to write curriculum because you are the social studies department. Like one teacher is given this document and said, make that happen. Yeah.
And
Good
I'll,
luck, I think, so.
But my point was, and then if it's a new graduate,
Yeah.
you want to give him or her all of the support you can by the format of your information.
Right, I agree, so. This is good, I'm excited.
and I'll also add that, my work with at least rural districts in Georgia, and that, sometimes it's the one teacher who's a social studies teacher who does all 5. In some districts, it was the English teacher who was also pinch hitting to do social studies because they couldn't find someone who was just going to do social studies. They couldn't pay for that person. So when you got standards like this, where you're kind of somewhat familiar with social studies, yeah, you can't catch a tail out of it. So.
And in K-5, you're not expected to be a specialist.
Right.
So you're doing great work.
I'm gonna represent those who know nothing and how we would explain to them. That's what I'm talking about. Not that, I mean, I don't mean it in that
We can't
context,
explain it to
but feeling
parents that
ignorant
are-
of information and.
Exactly.
But, you know, I mean, a new graduate student, I mean, they don't, even, I know you, like, I keep saying, like, I have to ask about this document too, like, I mean, and I looked at it once when I wrote curriculum, so I think I'm excited about this. I think this is much more user-friendly, and, you know, like the crowd has said, if teachers understand, they're gonna do a better job of translating it. As our teachers feel more expert, then they can translate out to parents, their assignments become better, the curriculum they develop is better. I mean, I think that this is, I'm excited about this.
Now, going to the group earlier, one of the things that I'm really interested in is trying to help these standards shift the way in which we prepare teachers to teach social studies. So if our argument is that it has to be much more about skills, much more about more interdisciplinary knowledge, then that we at least have some sort of corollary that requires our state to think about certification of social studies teachers, not in these kind of distinct silos, but in a much more interdisciplinary way. And so that's, you know, it's a long-term goal for, you know, next year, but I would like to keep that in mind that, you know, as we think about how we ask teachers to think about social studies, that there's also something to be thought about with preparation for teachers.
And so, you know, like and I'm asking this question as one who now that teach in this grade, you have a certain amount of expectation that the student already has certain skill levels to interpret data, interpret knowledge, and incorporate that into their.
I think the old adage is the 7th grade teacher blames the 6th grade teacher, and the 6th grade teacher blames the 5th grade teacher.
See, that's why the metropolitan areas are represented, is because there's a high frequency of students who don't come equipped with what you would teach your child. And so, it does, I guess you could say my key word is equip. You want to equip the brand new teacher who's just survived, you know, getting their degree and living on top ramen. And you want to equip parents to understand what's being taught to their children so they can have informed dialogue with their school board about what should be going on. So it has to be very user-friendly if we're actually going to honor the process of dialogue of the citizens with their government. And whether it's the teacher or the parent, it's got to be formatted in a way that is not professional jargon, that is understood by everybody.
With the, you mentioned about the interdisciplinary approach being able to bleed over, integrate the areas. Not that we can, it's probably beyond our purview here, but with the kids in class when they go to geometry, they go over here and they learn this, they don't normally bring that all together as part of what they're learning. When I point out to kids that, look how you can take these points of geometry, the way that angles relate to musical scales and things like that. Oh, whoa. And that not just for kids, but for the teachers too. The kids pick it up from the teachers when they think of, oh, I don't teach that. It's like, okay, well, that's something that's not connected.
That's what you're getting on with developmentally appropriate. If these really are, then we're formatting it in a way to encourage, because kids can't be expected to make those connections.
Right.
But we can teach it in a way that they understand it if it's presented explicitly. And I think we've been far too dependent on the implicit curriculum, and you'll pick it up somewhere, rather than being deliberate about explicitly showing developing minds what the connections are.
Well, and I think too we have to consider, like when I look at what's going on with current reform, we're finding that they are throwing out very, what has always been for hundreds of years known as what we would call exceptional pieces of works of literature, as works of art. And so that when kids come to historical documents, are they able to interpret what is being read in those cultures, because their vocabulary has been so diminished from the ELA. It's hard for me to see even how you can separate, not, ELA from history. Does that make sense?
Well, I'll just tell you why I would ask to leave for a couple of minutes. Yeah, they're struggling over there in ELA. One group apparently says, well, one is information text because they're readable. And I'm like, excuse me, that's not English language arts. And furthermore, if they understood that what we're discussing is an integration of great works, including novels maybe the founders read so that we understand what a republic is, then what the group is doing in isolation is robbing the opportunity of collaboration. And just hang on there. We'll get to communicate with them, I hope. But what I appreciate about this group is that you've got the larger view. Not all of us have that. So I'm sorry I had to leave, but I was trying to calm some nerves.
So Brian, can I go back to direction since you wrote down? Is that WW then AH or is it?
WH, and then AH.
I wanted to make sure that the existing Missouri curriculum standard makes sense. That 8th grade is the strands, the history strands in the 8th grade address early American history, and then the 6th and 7th grade strands, when we look at history in there, it's world history, like the early world history, and that's the way that the history is laid out. So when we look at strand 1, and they're only addressing the Declaration of Independence in grade 8, it's because they're doing river valleys in Egypt and Rome and Greece, and so that's why that Declaration of Independence is not in 6 and 7, is because it doesn't fit with the history part of that. So that's that horizontal, that's that integration part. So just knowing that knowing what history they're talking about in those courses will help us to know what government students really need to make sense for them to be doing in that subject. Not that we can't talk about Declaration of Independence, but knowing that that's why it's not there, not there.
Under the history part, but then when you get to like the geography or the cultural part, because in Missouri, 6th or 7th grade, depending on, I don't know where your school districts do it, but my district does world history at 6th grade, world geography and cultures in 7th grade. But Parkway School District, which is just literally, could be the house next door, right, does it world geography in 6th grade, world history in 7th grade, and the state allows for there to be either or. So you may see some pieces of our founding documents in those pieces in both grade levels, but it depends on where in the course of the history or the cultures that they're studying in which they embed those. Does that make sense?
Well, and if we had a little more spiral approach, then that, if they're worried why they want to have schools maybe have that variable in there, so in case students change districts or whatever, I don't know why they have that variable, but there's a reason why they have local control, and it's a good one. But that spiral would help. Even some basic review of kids who maybe missed things to help interject. And I am a big fan in math of mastery with a little bit of spiral. Because I think we have way too much spiral going on inside.
But when your scope and sequence is determined by the publisher rather than by the professionals in your communities and in your state, that's when you have a problem, because their overriding agenda is the bottom line. And what's most cost effective for them. So what's cost effective for them is getting a few experts who write a single book on world history and then sell it. And what we're saying is that's not developmentally appropriate.
And just to clarify, I know you mentioned publishers a few times, and a lot of districts are just going away from that approach. So we have to keep that in mind as well, that this work is not going to be dependent or tied to,
So it's actually timely, because we'll be able to equip the people moving away from textbooks.
swear on this.
Well, okay, can I ask you a question then? So like when we talk about history, and we just talked about spiral, and we talked about grade level expectations, a kid can, you know, I have a 4-year-old and I have 7th graders, so there's a huge gap in learning. And so what they're picking at here, so you have this little circle of what these kids can do. And then you have a bigger circle for what these kids can do, which you incorporated on that circle. And then you have a bigger circle. So each year, that subject matter is getting covered, but it's getting covered with greater depth because the child is able to handle that. And kind of with that integration, how could we sort of give them, if not at a minimal basis, at least give them some of all of it every year, where there is maybe just a review. Am I making any kind of sense here?
I think that there is and there isn't, and I think what Jessica was talking about, which is the shift of the course changes. So it appears in some way, shape, or form, but it might not be foregrounded. So we're talking about world history, that you do talk about the founding documents in the United States, but that they become just one of a set in the course of world history. So I think there are ways to do that, but I also think because we're a really local control school, it might look different in different silos in which the schools decide to.
Especially like in middle school, especially, a lot of teachers will start with the founding documents. Makes sense because that's what kids. That's their point of reference. That's where they live. That in essence is their core, and therefore they should be looking at that and in reference to other governmental systems or other cultures and that kind of piece. So but there is that freedom to kind of figure out how you can best make those connections for kids because of the local control piece.
Mike, I have a question talking about the strand fiscal year. We've got legislation that requires an honors of Veterans Day, and that might provide an opportunity to look at veterans throughout each period. The other statute had to do, and frankly, I wasn't familiar with this one. I just might be on the federal level. Constitution Day. And so September becomes a very interesting month for observing law, and as you write your strands, thinking about that so that you build some acknowledgement of veterans into the sequence.
Well, I do agree with you. At some point, we need to pull out the Missouri statute that talks about the requirements for graduation related to the courses at high school, but also the teaching of American history and the chronology related to civil rights movements and things of that sort to make sure that we are standing true to our state mandate.
Yeah.
Does it make sense to just look at the first, and this is just, I think, a practice in implementing this to see how well this works, is to look at the first thing mentioned under strand 1 and in Missouri's curriculum, standards, and then look at what the wording is for 6, 7, 8, 9, and 12.
Okay, so we're looking, I'm at number 1, principles of the document shaping the republic. I'm going to look at 6, 7, 8. And kind of be thinking about that in relationship to what I see in the 9-year law. Okay.
I mean, with that as a starting point, we can look at similar language and some of these other sorts of, at some point, we're going to have to, look at the standards and actually sort of write down the best thinking right now for what that's going to look like for that particular idea. So that particular idea as it goes down. And we can start, we'll have to be so tall, smaller writing utensil, because there's a lot of them. So in sixth grade, we have identify responsibilities that governments and citizens need to become effective republic. And they do this a lot in our documents. They change the verb. They keep everything else the same. Instead of putting the word analyzing, the same thing. And then in the eighth grade, we're analyzing important principles from the Declaration of Independence, including inalienable rights. Sense of protection. And then, so then, in world history, we have analyzed changes in democracy and republics over time. In U.S. history, we have analyzed the changing role of governments in the context of a historical period being studied.
You know, I'm very interested on that grade 6 trend. I heard that someone is proposing legislation to require all students to take the citizenship test, just to understand the knowledge that's required of immigrants. It might be interesting to explore the information that's taught for people studying for citizenship and make that somehow.
Some of it's really rote memorization, like what state is this, or what's the capital of this, or
What year was?
some of it's, some of it's,
You take the best ideas.
yeah.
I'm sorry, I know I'm not backtracking, because I tend to get lost.
Are you looking for what we're?
Like, which main heading were we in, principle 3, or over 7?
Number 1, and then the first idea is principles of republic in the United States.
Right, we're on
So this is actually sort of like where the rubber, I got this language, and we were best thinking about how to do that.
And this is at
This is
BOK 2, as just a little deeper.
I was trying to ADHD and jump ahead. We don't really have a 9, 10, 11, 12 column, do we?
Not on
In
this
any of
one.
these?
Well, that is what we're trying to do, yeah.
And remember, they're not necessarily 9, 10, they are broken down by subject type. Course type.
So it would be at some point in high school, and every high school in the state has them sequenced differently. So you kind of have to just create a high school expectation, I guess.
So when they do.
Just want to make sure I wasn't missing it like I was 75 yesterday.
Right there.
Yeah, so whenever they do world history, they're going to do this thing with governments, whenever they have that class.
So 6th grade, under those principles, identify responsibilities that governments and citizens need to accept to become effective in the republic. Is there anything in there?
When you look at that as a teacher, does that tell you a whole lot?
Well, again, most of us aren't looking at this document, we're looking at most throughout the state. We're looking at what has been taken from this to create our curriculum. Now, I do know that there are some districts that do, and many throughout the course of the state. And so you make a really valid point that it needs to be very clear, and Jamie mentioned it earlier, for those districts who don't necessarily have a separate curriculum piece where they're actually coming to the state and looking at these direct standards to try and create their course structures right then and there. We want to make sure it's clean and clear.
I tend to think this is pretty straightforward. I mean, Republic has a very specific definition that teachers would know. It's indicating both government and citizens, so it's telling the teacher you have to do that reciprocal. And it's talking about responsibilities. It's then giving the teacher some freedom of exactly which ones you want to choose, but it has to it has to be government citizens and it has to be republic means I'm electing you to represent me, you're then representing. So I think that's pretty clear, especially at the 6th grade level, with a pretty low DOK. So a 2 is basically saying, you know, we want kids to know. And if we even scroll down to the like lower grades there, like they've already kind of had majority, I mean, I know our counterparts may make adjustments, but you know, you're seeing the full progression. Whereas a 6th grade teacher, I would see, you know, this full document and I would know, okay, the kids already have practiced with majority rule because they voted on what they want their Friday, like, points party to be, like, they pick snow cone, not popcorn, you know, like, they kind of, so I think that,
And they do it.
Constitution work in Missouri.
yeah, we've got all that already listed, so. Yeah, Missouri Constitution, in 4th grade, enforcing laws, they've got Declaration of Independence, inalienable rights that all the year before, so.
And we're pretending like all this is gonna stay the same.
Right, I mean, I
Like,
think we,
five friends, like,
I
just.
at this point, we have to kind of just assume that, and then
We're looking at, we're analyzing this.
I'm kind of in both parts, forgetting what you were just saying, but also thinking about that we are setting this out as if we don't know what they're doing down there. Does that tell you enough? And probably, as you're saying, yes, because that will have been laid out to some extent by them one way or the other.
I like the language of responsibilities and effective.
I don't see anything listed in that language that would contradict anything else or be in opposition to what they would.
I don't see anything objectionable in that. I'm just wondering, does it have, is there anything substantive in it? And maybe that would be, from a teacher's point of view, from someone actually implementing this, yes, because I know these other things. But looking at it from my point of view, like,
It's so.
those are nice words, but it tells me nothing.
Can I quibble with the word effective? Because it's kind of vague. I mean, effective, I think we know what it means.
Success.
Yeah, right, or good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I always like to put things in action, so I always like to think of citizenship and citizenry in action. And we're not thinking about responsibilities, like the governments, and again, I'm thinking specifically of citizens, to become active citizens in our public.
Or to participate.
Participate.
Yeah. Right, right, right. I always like to think of trying to get, right, because I always think of the verb like my teacher, so what's the construct of this thing is trying to get you to do with your students. And getting you to think about activity, I think, is more than just straight knowledge. Again, there's a place for knowledge, but I always like to think about it in terms of action.
Yeah,
Let me
that's gotta
tell
be.
you why I love that, is because, to participate, because I had always been, when I say surrounded with the word, or the word state, your voting is participation.
Sure.
But nobody said running for candidate, okay? Running as a candidate is something you do, because a republic means the leadership comes from the people. And it's not just about voting for somebody else, it's about assuming your responsibility in leadership.
Right.
And I love it.
Right.
I love that.
Yeah. That would make it actually make sense. This looks to me, as it is, kind of like a sales
And
meeting.
remember, and again, I'll
Wholesale.
give the people who wrote this initially some slack in that
Yeah.
they were designed to be kind of very bottom, kind of basic, let you do what you want to do. The district's can decide what effective is.
Kind of like what Jessica was saying about the North Carolina standards, that was the second,
Phase 2.
Come at it,
Phase
right.
2, yeah.
So,
and we need to kind of
getting
do
real
the same.
background, better wordsmith it, but reading it as is, putting it into action.
I mean,
Identify responsibility of governments and participatory citizens.
Can I propose a suggestion? I'm getting ready to get on and get the Word document of this, and I'll turn track changes on where I can go in and it'll keep what we took out, but it'll put in what it is so we can see them both, and we can go back and revisit if no one's opposed. I'll go ahead and do that on my, that way it's not crazy, because we're gonna have a lot of writing on that.
I would say to participate in your governments.
Well, I think we need that word republic in there.
Yes.
Oh, yes, yes.
So I think I'm just in the wrong
Yeah, I mean,
one. In the governance of
Of
the
the
republic or something. Or of the-
Identify
it should be
responsibilities that governments and citizens need to understand to participate effectively in the republic.
And then we'll make it grammatically correct.
Good idea. Good thought. So I'm speech writing practices. That's the key here. We have to
Yeah. Word that, word for word.
So,
It's taking a minute, so if someone can abstract that for now, and then I'll get in.
are these items that we need to agree with? Or I think it's, where do we feel?
What if we're all in like, all is, we can go back and revise and maybe do official voting once we made a little progress, is that
Yeah.
more effective than?
So,
You guys should be comparing this to something else though as we go, which we're kind of just comparing it to nothing, just, is that not true?
Well, we're comparing it to the existing standard. Then we'll get to Massachusetts and say, how does what we think now is a better existing standard compared to Massachusetts?
It would be wonderful if we had the framework of two that are so similar that you could just go, okay, here's what they said, and here's what we're doing, and how, which,
I agree wholeheartedly
it
with
just
that.
seems like we're gonna have to.
We don't have that.
and the alignment of those is going to be where it's going to be very confusing because it won't.
Right, we don't all mesh up.
Yeah, so I think that we're in the right place of looking at how we can make what we have workable and usable.
And then compare that.
Understanding that and then saying, is there something that's in something that in these other documents that we got?
Okay.
Does that make sense? That makes sense. So
And I think because all the other documents are so different, I think we're kind of
And it also says, if you've reviewed your own documents,
necessary.
you see what you believe needs to be, strengthened. And you might see that strength better, represented in another document.
Yeah.
So you're actually identifying what you currently think are weaknesses.
So, after looking at grade 6, we move across to the grade 7. Analyze responsibilities governments and citizens need to accept.
Are you wanting me to write? I'm just asking.
Do you know how to use tractated? I'm gonna do it I was gonna do it here.
That's fine, I know you are, but I didn't know, does our group want me to have to try to write this out here?
You know what, Wendy, one thing that I might be doing, if I can, the thing up there would be, note participate, might be the word.
Okay, that's the one that we changed, right? Participatory, is that what you said, or?
Well, we're gonna.
Essentially participate, okay, all right.
Alex, talked about his, not necessarily liking effective, but more so wanting to participate, desiring.
That's good, so that
Yeah, helps us know where we're at.
Okay, so that's the word that we just, okay.
Analyze responsibilities, governments, and citizens.
We also said keep the public, right?
Yes.
Okay, no judging if I have typos, I'll do the best. I
You're
can.
good.
I'm trying to keep up that maybe.
And then, would we like to, again, in grade 7, it's duplicate language, all we've done is change identify to analyze, so then we would make the same change in grade 7. We'll participate.
I believe so.
So,
Is what they've done is they've changed the,
Shoot, because 6 and 7 are
Rigor.
flip-flop years.
they've changed a little bit of what students do with it. Are we ready to look at a?
Can I pick on that one?
Yes.
And I don't have an answer. I just,
It's speaking for it, funny.
I mean, again, the root is fine, is the verb action, which is analyze. So if it's 6th grade, then let's pretend like it's not flip-flop, but it's scaffolded. Here are the things that I need to know to be an active citizen in terms of understanding the role that my government plays, so on and so forth. And then I move into analyze, and I'm trying to think of what the distinction would be between identifying and analyzing. Maybe you guys help
accepting the responsibility so that you can participate is how I read it. But
Oh, okay, up the responsibilities at the top, okay.
So would a better word besides analyze responsibility,
Well,
I kind of know what you're saying there. It's kind of a funny word to put in front of that.
And analysis plays, I'm not know.
okay, so here's what we wanna think about. We wanna think about that BOK and that level of that cognitive thinking that the kids have to do. So for one, on grade 7, the fact that it just says analyze, why are they analyzed? If you're gonna have them analyze, they're gonna break apart the responsibilities, and look at how those parts connect and how they connect to the whole, governmental structure and being able to participate in it ultimately. And it doesn't read that way, and I think that's what you're saying. Whereas identify is simple. I mean, that is that they can give examples, they can pick it out with, in a situation. So it needs to be better worded if that's our intent, that they have to think about how to break it apart and look at its connection to the big idea of responsibility in government as a citizen. That it needs to be worded a
So
little bit
what
better.
are the words in Bloom's chart, under analysis, investigate?
Does it,
I actually like the word identify responsibility.
Well, that's a lower level.
Right.
We have to.
We did that in 6th grade.
would
So
analyze,
what do we do now?
would analyze make more useful sense if we brought it back in with understand? So we're breaking it apart by analyzing it in order to accept doesn't quite do it. To understand and accept or so forth. Something that's to synthesize back together what you've analyzed apart.
I mean, what's the point of trying to manipulate that word so much between grade 6 and grade 7? Because I don't see that, when you're saying analyze responsibilities, I would say,
Well, there's two different things, and I don't mean to cut it off. There's two different things. One is at the knowledge level. Because these are words here.
Well, he's explaining, my question is, why is the declaration of independence there not becoming major?
If you're doing a math, you say just name things.
That's being 8th grade.
Right.
Oh, really, we were at 8th grade then.
You're right, it's found doctors.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Well,
it may be, this continues, I wonder if it's on.
yeah.
If it's going down to, it's complex,
We're critical.
but it's also now, it's saying more.
It does, Mary.
So it can keep going on the next.
Includes concentration down in the next.
Traditional way that they
It separates.
from grade 8 and then find the grade analyze in this grade. It's really better.
Oh, right.
Right.
It's usually like that, it's down column.
Okay, so a generic word that becomes forward. Declaration of independence.
On that grade level.
And the principles, or except the list of grievances, which is why we're resolving the relationship between both. So does that belong someplace else?
Because it would
While we concentrate on the principles of the Republic, as the study of the Constitution.
Vertically, 8th grade doesn't work with 7th grade. It's supposed to be the same skill, concept, but all of a sudden we're doing something different. So we might look at changing 8th grade to say, apply or notice examples of responsibilities of governments and citizens that are included in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And now we're doing something that's more consistent with that skill. Now they just do something different.
Yeah.
And I just also wanted to point out that a cheap trick, I believe, in education is that we keep the wording the same, but we just change the verb. And what happens in reality is that we just keep doing the same thing. We don't change the activity. So it does help to not necessarily just keep the same words, but what are we going to do now? And it's going to be very similar to that skill concept, but just changing the word is not always very good. Teachers could actually change that instruction just because we changed the word to analyze. And we want to make sure.
Well, and then I started breaking out that analyzing the help and the instruction.
If you're analyzing the document, you're learning about the people and the, who created the events.
don't know where, like, usually in any kind of document analysis of like a primary source, there's typically, and I haven't read all this enough to know where, or maybe it's not like very directly in here, but like when you're sourcing a document where you're looking at point of view, intent, author, audience, would
Can
like
we make
to-
a note of that to pay attention to how we might make reference?
and it may very well, it probably is in here.
I we need to note that,
Just don't.
Mary, we need to note that up on the board.
Yeah, in my cursory review of this, and I thought that was a good.
So, and should, you want me to just, oh, she's marking. it.
Tying people in with the principal.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
maybe on page 3, because that's where we saw the first documents. So I'll put like sourcing documents there, like maybe to make sure that at some point as we're.
And their authors.
Right, well,
Well, that's
so,
one
Sourcing and events and authors.
And again, I want us to think about the construct that we're playing with in the strand, which is knowledge of the principles expressed in the documents.
Right.
And so that's the construct. So again,
Well,
I think it's a good point, but we also have to think about the construct is still knowledge principles,
Other republic.
other republic, right?
Well, authors, that, I mean, who is it that wrote these documents?
Sure.
Is quite frankly the point.
Right.
So, to me, that is not acceptable. So how do you, as Mary suggested, make notes that that is communicated in this expectation?
In one possibility, since our concept's going to be across, this is our government's idea, and our history idea can be to evaluate the motivations and goals of the founders of the document.
Right.
So those be cleared up. And so one weakness of looking at this in absence of the history is that we don't get that right in the face at that time.
Right.
So that's a way we could get that in
So
there.
where did that be included?
Keep it pure. I don't know.
What did you say?
Grade, are you talking about grade 8 on the chart?
Well, yeah.
Is that what
No,
it's-
7 still, right?
7?
Should we start 7 there?
Oh,
We're not exactly probably right. It would, if you want to talk about like the people, that would be probably in the history section.
Right.
So that would be in
Separate from
like
government?
American history across over in a different strand that we haven't done yet, which is the history strand. So I think if we, like, this is kind of our notes and stuff to remember.
Right.
That way in like 10 weeks, if we ever get back to this, we'll remember that we want to talk about the sourcing and the authors and like we'll have that conversation in the history context.
Yeah, excellent, because once you have an A grade history, you apply rights and responsibilities of individuals to events in U.S. history and everybody's life, but it doesn't really get to the people of history. If that's what's in your history strand for grade 8, it doesn't really get to studying the people who created your Constitution.
That may also have been.
Which we may
Yeah.
get to.
Yeah.
in the-
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
it's not just that.
This gives you a framework.
So authors of this document, what was that?
Under history,
Right.
make a note to individuals of history who created the document.
And one way to understand this is, so we're looking at acquiring documents and we're looking at them, what's all the things that's affecting this time period? Well, you
What
know,
we're looking at, contextualization.
yeah,
Correlation.
that context of the documents is really important. And if we keep them nicely aligned together, we're going to notice that as again, we're going to do all this thinking all together.
And back to what Brian and Alex mentioned about analyze, can we remedy that by putting another word like understand or?
Yeah, I mean, Jeff,
What
that's
do you-
good. You kind of started with that, to get the kind of point about how to scaffold on top, to progress from identify to unpack. And I like Brian's suggestion. I think he's absolutely right that if we just cheapens it, if we just reuse the same route. So do you have a suggestion in terms of where we progress from
How we
there?
scaffold, well, I just sent out to everybody in email a document that actually links the verbs that you're using in your standards to the cognitive process that kids have to do. So I sent it in all your emails just now, so you should be able to pull it up on your phone as a PDF. It is from Revised Blooms, and so if you look at it, which is the idea that when we get to a creation stage, meaning when kids have to create, problem solve, and create a plan or things like that, that is actually the highest level, whereas synthesize goes with analyze because it's just really kind of the flip process. So when you open that up, you'll look at, in the gray areas, there's multiple words that have the same meaning, but those gray words actually define what kids have to do in their brain or think about when they're thinking about what they're doing in that standard or what we want them to be able to do. So you'll see that like identify it's that recall stage. So that's a foundational level that we want to move up as we go. So when you're moving to applying that, do we want them to draw conclusions about their rights? Do we want them to be able to make inferences about how that will impact the way they act as a citizen, meaning that action that you guys were talking about in the 6th grade stand, to participate, which I wholeheartedly believe the whole purpose is to be an active citizen, and I love that you brought that up. Do we want to talk about, when we say explain, it's a little bit deeper than just summarize, it's really about the cause and effect relationship. So if I accept those responsibilities, then how does that affect the way I participate? So they can see that. Or we could go to that next step. Quite frankly, fundamentally it makes sense if by 8th grade they're analyzing within the context of American history, that maybe in 7th grade we are looking at more of that understanding level. That idea of how do I apply this a little bit more, not just identify it, but actually apply it some.
So not interpreting?
Because just interpreting means that they can give you examples, they can, pick it out and summarize it, but when you get to infer, or you get to that explain and cause and effect relationship, they have to do a little bit more with it. So, we have to think about what is it that we want them, as a 7th grader, what do we want to see happening with it?
You know what I'd love to see, that they were reading Federalist Papers, what the authors of the Constitution have to say about what their view of citizen action was.
Okay, so let's think, the context in which they're looking at it is through the world history, world geography lens, and so they're in that course. So while they might look at an American document to help get their frame of reference, and we want to do that in their understanding of rights and responsibilities, but how is it going to look within that lens?
The lens of a broader view.
Right.
I would say, well, look at what France is going through at the same time, and how does the American Revolution.
But they may not be in that time period.
Okay.
So that, while we agree, yeah.
Maybe later on down the road. 7th grade, I'm not sure.
Because that
Reading levels are.
Typically, in middle school, how far do
They go up to Renaissance, Middle Ages, with they start with ancient civilization.
We have the
So-
same problem in the 6th grade, really, is we have these responsibilities of rights to citizens, sort of independent of a time period where, even in 6th grade, when we talk about this stuff, it doesn't fit really perfectly with historical time periods. But it might be part of like a class culture, or the rules and the expectations are set in my class as far as,
Well-
participate, bring it back every time it's relevant, so.
And I can tell you a way that some of our 6th and 7th grade teachers look at it is, it says, analyze responsibility, governments and citizens, not just American government, governments. And so they may introduce, okay, we've been learning about our own government system since kindergarten up until now. So let's elicit that background knowledge. Let's go in and look at our Constitution. Let's look at our founding documents. Let's look at those pieces to see what the rights and responsibilities we have in our own country. And then go to, okay, so now we're studying ancient civilizations. What kind of governmental structure did they have within there? What rights and responsibilities can you identify based off of what you know rights and responsibilities are within those ancient civilizations? And then And then how do they utilize that to participate in their governments? Then compare it. So in contrast, really, or in symmetry to what do we do within our own republic. So that's how they might actually be doing it.
So we could be applying the concepts of rights and responsibilities to government and
And we should.
Well, and that really goes back to what we were talking about before, discussing how we came to current thought in the American system of government from current.
Right. And so, no, that's okay. So we have to make sure, while we want to always tap into and go back to the frame of reference kids have, elicit the background knowledge they have, and tap into their frame of reference, which is, like, let's go back to the essence of who they are. They're Americans, so that's what they know. But the standards is saying responsibilities that governments and citizens have. But then it goes back to participate in republic. So for me to effectively participate in the Republic of America or United States, I do have to understand the rights and responsibilities of other governments. Because when I'm going to act within my own government and make decisions or advocate for decisions that are being made in response to what those responsibilities and actions in other places of the world are happening.
So how much civics do you actually teach in the 6th grade?
You do.
But
That's
how
what-
much?
Well, that's what this is kind of guiding.
And remember, it's
It
still
And still principal one,
That's
right?
right.
I thought you had one of the. Yeah.
You know, you're absolutely right, and that becomes the discussion as to the degree of government, I would say intrusion versus individual rights, and where on the scale the different governments are.
That's asking to evaluate, and to ask 6th and 7th graders to evaluate is way beyond
Well,
early
I was
development.
going ahead.
Oh, to high school.
Yeah, so
Which is
learning,
very appropriate as a high
learning
school.
that the different governments exist at this middle school level is appropriate, and then eventually headed towards that contrast and comparison and the effects.
So I'm gonna go back to Alex, your statement. So when we're looking at, I do think 7th graders, even 6th graders, within the context of world geography or world history, if they do it that way, if they're breaking down what are rights and responsibilities within different governmental systems and looking at it to the bigger piece of how then am I, participating, they might be able to do that, but are we still jumping ahead? And so, I like that you brought that up, because in some ways I'm thinking, if this learning piece is done the way it appears to be intended, I don't know that they're really analyzing. I think they're really looking, drawing conclusions. They're, doing the cause and effect relationship that explain, that kind of piece. So,
So,
That's
just for
right.
example, we might just throw in our notes here, we can apply the responsibility of governments and citizens to geography and world history, like Hammurabi's Code, and then places like ancient Greece.
Right.
And so now we bring in Plato and Republic, and then how does that look then in ancient Rome? We have to do this connection between ancient Rome and what did that government look like in us? And so we can apply the concept of, or I would just submit, apply the concept of responsibilities, governments, and citizens to
Multiple.
and then
I think,
and then maybe list some of those possible places.
and I think if we kind of use this thing I sent out as a guide to help remember what are kids doing in their minds, if we stay true to it, and this would actually be a nice, even piece to the appendix as to what do these verbs really mean.
Yes.
So apply needs to carry out a process according, when you think about the cognitive process, do we want them to, draw inferences about Hammurabi's Code, infer inferences related to rights and responsibilities of government? Do we want to explain? You see what I'm saying? I'm agreeing with everything you said, but I think we have to be careful of the verb we pick, because if we don't let the users of this document know what that verb was supposed to mean, it's going to be all over the board again. So we need to have a consistent way of choosing those verbs.
And
Does that make sense?
that gets back to the habits of mind and disposition being explained in the introduction.
I take apply as I take a situation I'm familiar with, and I take it to a situation that's a little different. And that's what's sort of mentioned in that. That's why it's applies.
No, right. Right.
Take a principle to a different situation.
Right.
And so we don't want that.
Oh, it's not that I don't like it. I just wanted to make sure that when we use it, that we're all in the
So
same
we're actually
place.
using it
There is a,
in
Can I
connected to
put
the
them
language.
just adding the word multiple, makes it, like, if we're applying the responsibilities of citizens and governments to multiple systems, okay, that gives your teacher flexibility depending on whatever time frame their school is using. Like, it doesn't hamstring them in the time, but it's telling them, you have to pick more than one government. You have to do this in more than one place, and that's harder than in sixth grade, where you could, in theory, just teach identification with one. It could be yours or others, depending on your course. But seventh grade, you're now upping the ante a little bit, multiple. And then eighth grade, we're saying, okay, now you're gonna do a lot more with it, and we're specifically now in US, so we're gonna work in like all these foundational documents, you have sources.
Yes.
yeah, I was gonna point out with the most standards, they have a glossary of terms for things, but I think we mentioned they're putting something like this in for glossary of active
Right, or,
words
yeah.
and terms and so forth. I think that would be a good idea to have that in there as well. Because this alone doesn't explain
Right,
what you're talking about.
Right.
Maybe so there on 7, one of the things we want to under participate, maybe a multiple, is the word.
so, I was
Multiple government.
or
Yeah.
three.
By the concept of responsibility.
Okay, so,
Apply the concept of the.
To make it, because we changed that verb
concept of,
Well, that's,
we say,
there's intuitive,
government
which is, I mean, the difference.
Responsibilities.
and,
Are we keeping animals though? Or are we doing?
yeah.
Well, we analyze.
We're gonna edit that later, right? We're gonna figure it out.
Right now, we're saying
That's what I was.
apply to different situations. It's a better step up than analyze.
So for,
Concept of government and citizen
so maybe under multiple governments, you would also just want to write, apply would be there.
multiple
I
systems.
want to write analyze with a line so we can visually see them. Yeah, you did.
I was doing it as you were saying.
Good job.
You're doing a good job there, Wendy. Okay.
Marker. Building marker.
All right, this is what I have. I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt.
No, you're good.
From what everybody said, so correct me if I need to change it. I have apply the concept of government and citizen responsibilities to governmental systems.
Multiple.
Plural.
Multiple.
You want multiple on there? To multiple governmental
I
systems?
would say in multiple governments, or in societies with different governmental systems. But that's really all it's
Okay, so, or different systems of government? Well, then how does that work?
Read it into that point.
Okay, right now it says, apply the concept of government and citizen responsibilities to multiple governmental systems. So what that's saying is that, from the way I'm reading it, from what you were saying, but I have that, I was looking fresh, that means that I'm looking at the concept and trying to figure out how that fits into different type of governmental systems.
Or do we want to say government philosophies?
It's in.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I would try to get the relationship between the society and the government, and citizen responsibility in a society under different governmental systems.
So not multiple and different.
Ooh, I don't, I'm just putting it down so I didn't forget what she said.
Say it one more time.
You know, under might be a word that's negotiable, but you would want to know the rights and responsibilities of citizens in societies having different governmental systems. And, you know, my point is, your responsibilities as a citizen in Cuba is different than your responsibility as a citizen in France. And they are under different government systems.
So that's that you're recognizing the rights and responsibilities of the citizens.
In
And
those-
so 7 is, you have to take it deeper, so that now, see what I'm saying? So I'm not certain I'm seeing,
The connection between, yeah.
yeah. This is the trade credit standards, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Where do you get better at?
If we say multiple governments, in theory, isn't that
It's
the
like,
different societies?
Yeah.
I'm just throwing it out there, isn't that?
Let's leave it, come back to the draft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is better than, this is
Because
better.
we do
than
have,
the
probably 80,000 more of these.
Yeah, so, not great.
You notice though,
Not
that
to
screen
the-
one is not that big, so,
Not to depress everyone, but,
it'd be cool if you're like, oh, you got screens.
Let's, talk about that practically, today,
It's
lunchtime.
lunchtime.
Well, do we wanna do 11:30 to 12, 11:30, 12:15? Let's, what do people feel for lunch today?
What time are you missing?
I think today it's,
It was 2.
it was
Might have been 3, but I have to leave.
we need to go by one, which is fine.
I didn't know I was coming over to write, so I need to go by the governmental system. So how does that create a governmental system? So that's
Right, that's what I thought.
I think it's really
Sure.
about,
they
The
know,
whole
they
word-
know there's rights and responsibilities, but, sorry, I'm having,
Yeah, that's okay.
I'm having a but see, I really think it's that
Can
they're,
we go today until at least 2:00, 2:30?
We should go at least this far.
We'll just get a sense of
Because I find my spaces.
I think so, and then it's gonna take probably, I would say from 2 to 2:30 to determine what our next steps are, when we're gonna meet and that kind of stuff, so, okay.
Reggie, do you have to leave today at 2 o'clock?
So we got 1 o'clock
I
today.
really need to go. Do you think quickly before we break for lunch then, we should talk about,
For the meetings,
can we
Yeah.
talk about?
That's true.
Yeah, okay, this
Maybe
might
we'll-
be
Is
a good time.
that okay?
maybe we'll
I
just
think we
for
were
that.
gonna be back before she left. It's just that.
oh, so you wanna wait?
We were just gonna do a 30-minute lunch today, right?
Is
It's a
that?
shorter day.
Oh, okay, yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
maybe,
yeah.
maybe that'll be our first agenda item when we come back, but I don't know how far we'll be to our determine. We know.
Right, I don't think we do next
We can
steps,
take,
so what I
we can take what they can come in.
As Brian had said, I already have this first process more time, correct? Are we still
We're
doing that?
actually waiting.
Yeah, I mean, we.
Oh, we have meals
We have meals
today.
do we today?
Yeah.
Mary.
Oh, and there's
And your name?
your name.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
$9 lunch, everyone.
Check it out.
Oh, crazy.
Is it round nine or is it, oh,
What's
Nine
nine?
and
The little pen.
Bring your change if you're
on the
up.
4th floor.
Yeah.
I've got this, you think
We don't have a dress. Nathan, we don't have a, we have a weird.
You can be
So
anybody you
now I
want
don't
to
like it.
be.
But it's still gonna be us, you're not looking at it being house.
We just get better at coming at my grades and process. And if you're
Yeah,
saying
but
that
she's
you
saying,
feel
and
that
it's
way,
tracking change, so like, when you see what you
Got a
got
great
and then back, and then we can.
it's group
And that
time.
is, well, I've done this before. Instead of,
Yours is generic.
like.
Try to get a bunch of
I
teachers.
don't think we have a
It's
van in here.
like, I like this word. Oh, I like this word.
We'll settle in.
I do believe this is for the cafe.
wow, that's amazing.
They have hot lunch.
This is fresh, yes.
Okay, guys, some housekeeping, that you hand this to the cashier prior to checking out, okay? All right.
Thank you.
I didn't get one.
I didn't either. My name was something on there.
Yeah. Whoever's left in this.
Julie,
Yeah, I honestly know.
I am
you
too.
need to change the name and mark it off, and put your name on there,
I see, okay, thank you.
because that's the list they had yesterday.
Let me make sure there's not another one in here, maybe one second.
There
There it is.
Are those people that should be here?
No, I have my name right there, in that blank spot.
It's not you.
Yeah,
This is Mike.
yeah, just square where you want it.
Okay.
When, did you hear that?
I'm sorry?
If it's not your name, mark it up, put your name on there. It's the way they cover their expenses.
All right, let's try to be back as close to 12 o'clock as possible. Okay, thank you.
I did, because my computer was.
Okay, you came back?
Yeah. And then I woke up at 11:30, I'm like,
What time is it? Is it morning yet? I had a good night, good morning.
How you feeling, Becky? I'm getting man cramps.